Hi, I'm Ralph Preston. We're back this week with another Stroke Buddies. This week we're talking with Jenna Muri-Rosenthal. She's has an interesting story because she became an occupational therapist, and she still practices occupational therapy, but she's also engaged in a good bit of physical therapy or working with people in terms of physical and holistic recovery. So rather than me tell Jenna's story, why don't I let her do it? Jenna, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got interested in autism in the first place and how that led you to becoming a speech and language pathologist, and then the course that your life took from there to get to where you are today.
Sure. So I'm a speech and language pathologist and a certified brain injury specialist. When I was younger, I worked with kids, and I sort of just took an interest in special populations with sort of more neurocognitive focus. And after college, I worked as a one-on-one aide for a kid on the autism spectrum, and I worked in a school for kids with language-based learning disabilities, is kind of what it was globally called then. And I just sort of took some interest in how people learn, and helping those who, I think now the term we use is neurodivergent. That wasn't a term then, but that's kind of, I've always just had an interest in, I like teaching and I like helping people learn. So finding ways to access individuals who don't kind of access the world in the way that everyone else does. So I worked in a couple of different settings, and I was an assistant teacher working at a school for kids on the autism spectrum, and I met a speech therapist for the first time. And her role was, she came into the classroom and she set up a fake ice cream shop, and the kids had to practice their social language skills, kind of just how do I order and be polite and take turns and all of that. And I was like, this is really cool. This is what I want to do. And so I went to graduate school, wrote my entrance essay and everything on working with the autism population. And in the world of speech and language pathology, as a student, it's important for the profession. They train you to work with every group. So from infants and pediatric feeding and swallowing and early intervention, all the way to end of life care and working in skilled nursing facilities and with folks at the end of life and everything in between. So during my schooling, they said, well, you're going to have to, you'll have an adult medical placement. And I said, all right, well, give me something difficult then, because I like to learn hard things. And I was placed on the brain injury unit at Spalding Rehabilitation Hospital, and I never looked back. That was the population I wanted to work with from there on out.
Cool. So, now you're a speech and language pathologist. I understand that you ended up at either, well, Spalding is kind of associated with Mass General. So you got involved at some point with Spalding and Mass General, which eventually led you to where you are today. You talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, I worked the first half of my career. I've been doing this for over 13 years now, on the inpatient brain injury unit at Spalding. And I was part of the moving the old hospital to the new hospital over in Charlestown. And, as things evolved in rehab, and the average length of stay sort of went down and down and down, and how long they wanted folks to stay in rehab got shorter and shorter, I felt like I was making less of an impact. And I hated the idea that I would meet a patient and within days they'd be leaving. And I didn't feel like I had, it felt like I'd meet someone, learn about them, and be handing them worksheets and tip sheets as they went out the door saying best of luck. And so I moved myself over to acute care at Mass General Hospital, which is, acute care is right when you have your stroke or your injury, into more of an assessment kind of place. And I found sort of a new passion for the field and what I could offer individuals by providing a lot of education, helping families and patients kind of understand what had happened and what would happen next. So having been in rehab for so many years, I had a good scope of what comes down the line. So I started, working there and doing inpatient care and meeting people right at I like to say sort of meeting them right at their worst and helping them through to get to better. Um, And then as far as fit to function, if you want me to go right into that part, I will. Through all of the years that I've been a speech therapist, I've always had individuals come looking for one-on-one speech therapy, right? So folks always eventually either insurance runs out or folks felt like they weren't getting what they needed from therapy anymore. And I say, like, as a speech therapist, if you have aphasia, for example, and communication is difficult, we can sit in an office and I can hand you worksheets and help you drill language, but how is that functional for you in getting back to everyday life? So all of the folks I would work with on one-on-one, we'd work on language and memory and all of the skills related to their actual work, to the things that they wanted to be doing. I share an example of, I worked with a young woman who had a pretty significant expressive aphasia, and she was a PE teacher and she wanted to get back to teaching. So we went into the school and we took pictures of all the games and tools and scooters, and we practiced naming those, and we practiced writing lesson plans and how would she describe these games that kids played, because it was functional. About halfway through my sort of career as a speech therapist, I started doing CrossFit and I became a CrossFit coach. And what I saw was that the gym was a place that was rife with opportunity for individuals to find functional improvement, to work on their language, to work on their thinking. And I started bringing my one-on-one speech clients into the gym and sort of blending functional fitness with language and cognitive rehabilitation. I'll take a breath there and see if there's any questions on that so far.
Actually, Josh has a question, and then we'll come back to it because I think that the whole thing, I've been preaching therapies all around you forever, and I'm a video guy, and I actually got a job with the Yellow Pages to go shoot a gym and their CrossFit operation, and I thought, well, this CrossFit stuff's pretty cool, but I never
Yeah.
thought it as I never saw it as functional recovery, which you did. Anyway, let's let Josh ask his question, then we'll come back to that.
Okay. So I had a stroke 13 months ago. It's my second one, but it's the first hemorrhagic one that affected. I couldn't walk. My left side was affected. After 4 weeks in rehab, I then had I had met with therapists, both OT and PT, that gave me regimens and toys to play with and all that stuff. It was just littered around my house, and then I plateaued, and I was told that it was going to end, but I knew that there was a whole area of neuromuscular challenges that they were not addressing or knew very little about. And I was actually relieved and concerned. And then I found my way to a Feldenkrais practitioner, which is almost 180 degrees away from what I'm told to do by PTs. And well, the OT was more knowledgeable. She was younger and more curious about everything. And so I've been working for 10 weeks now, a weekly video lesson that I record. And the concepts are very different. And I love them. They seem to have a more compassionate approach, and they have a context for their answers that I find very healing. Just the way it might work, like the patience, the slow motion, the mindfulness, really appeals to me. But my family is frustrated with the slow progress, and I've learned to, and so what? No stretching, no weightlifting. When they're working right, she's slowly incorporating like things like Chinese healing exercises, and more like aerobic. But if my body's not operating right, I started having major pains in my back because my family was encouraging me to really walk and walk faster, and we were thrilled, and they were thrilled. that I was walking faster. So that story alone probably opens up a lot of discussion opportunities. So I'd leave that with you.
Well, I'd be interested to see what Jenna thinks about plateaus. I have my own idea about them and a quote that I'll give everybody from a friend of mine after we let Jenna say. Jenna, what do you think about plateaus, Jenna?
Well,
Put you on the spot.
yeah, no, I mean, it actually is a perfect segue into my, the sort of motto, the slogan for my business is better than good enough.
Right.
And that is grown from the idea that most rehab kind of says, oh, that's good enough, and then send you home on your way. And folks are in the rehab world more than happy, oh, you're good enough. You can walk. That's fine. You can walk in a straight line. That's good. You can talk a little bit. That's good. And that is good enough. But for most individuals out there in the world, that's not good enough. You want and you deserve better than good enough, and you're capable of recovery that continues for the rest of your life. Because we know with neuroplasticity that the brain is always changing and that there's always room for improvement. And sometimes that's a matter of finding new ways to approach old things and challenging your brain to learn and try new things, and because that's how the brain grows. So I don't really believe in plateauing.
Well, yeah, and the more you learn about neuroplasticity and how your brain forms, whatever you want to call it, a blueprint, patterns, whatever, the more input sources, like sometimes I talk to people I'm working with, or I talk to myself to reinforce things. The more different types of stimuli you give the brain, the more likely you are to create what some people call a blueprint, something that your brain, a little piece of chunk of something that your brain will remember and you can go back to. And the thing I was going to say from a friend of mine who is a SLP, by the way, Jenna, she says, there is no such thing as a plateau, only a therapist that doesn't know what to do. I like that one. I mean, it's, of course, it's a gross generalization, and it's not always true. And we're not here to bash therapists because they do the best they can. Just like we're not here to bash hospital systems and hospital settings because they're doing the best they can. If anybody wants to bash the insurance companies and the way our whole healthcare system is set up to basically send you home. Right. Well, like Jenna said something to me in a initial conversation we had, like, well, you can walk in a straight line, you can kind of talk, so it's time for you to go home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's a system, and
yeah.
You started off with the whole thing where, you see the world of recovery shrinking. I would assume that's maybe why you went to acute care rehab, because those people are likely, like Josh was saying, he was in the hospital 3 weeks or a good long time. So those people you typically going to see them more than some number of outpatient visits. I got 30 visits 14 years ago. I talk to people now who get like 20 or 15. I also found out, this is a little tip, Blue Cross Blue Shield, I don't know if they still do it, but back when I went, somebody told me if you go to PT and OT on the same day, they only count it as one. So I had 2 evaluations, and then I went 29 times to PT and OT on the same day, and they only counted it as 30. So I got 58 out of 30. Pretty good trick to know.
It's all about the tricks, unfortunately.
But people aren't getting that now. It's like you said. It's like you're greeting them and preparing the sheets to give them when they leave. Pretty much, from the beginning. It must be frustrating as a therapist, because most people, I mean, therapists are a lot like doctors and other people that want to help people. You said you always wanted it. You were interested in the way people learned and the way different people learn differently, and you wanted to help people. So, here you got a population that wants to help people that has their hands tied by the insurance company. So, talk a little bit about how you saw CrossFit as functional. I'm trying to understand how I went in and spent 2 and 3 hours there videotaping the whole thing while I'm preaching. Therapy's all around you, and I didn't see it as therapy. I kind of thought, that would be kind of cool. Well, I'm not going to get a 500-pound tire for my backyard, probably. And I don't have a monkey bar, but this or that. I found a couple of things interesting, but I didn't think about the whole thing in terms of functional recovery. And I'm going to a gym at the same time myself. I mean,
Yeah, happy to talk about that. So, I think CrossFit. So when individuals think about CrossFit, those who've heard of it, right, we tend to think of what we see televised, right? What which is what the elite athletes are doing. So, and that's, what you see things like the CrossFit Games or the competitions, that's like the Super Bowl of fitness, right? That's not for your everyday athlete. When you put your kids in Pop Warner football, it's not because you saw what happens in the Super Bowl. It's because you want them to learn sports, right? When somebody wants to learn how to run, you don't show them the elite marathoners and say, hey, this is you. You have them learn how to run a mile. And so when you think about fitness, every brand of fitness is defined by what it prioritizes. And in CrossFit prioritizes what we call functional movements. And so what that means is that all of the things that we do in the gym, regardless of the crazy things you see the elite athletes doing, swinging from rings and heavy barbells overhead, all of the movements are based on things that you see out there in the world. They're naturally occurring in everyday life. And that's what makes it functional fitness. So if you strip down to the basics, you think about what is a deadlift? It's just picking up something off the ground, picking something heavy up, which we all have to do. What's a squat? It's sitting down on the couch or getting on and off the toilet. What's a burpee? It's getting off the ground if you fall. And so CrossFit, when you dial it down to what it means for your everyday individual, it's focusing on movements that will help you out there in your everyday life. And so when I think about that for survivors, every single athlete who comes through my door, one of the first things I ask them is, how do they get down to the floor and back up again? And 90% of the people who come through my gym, most of whom are stroke survivors, say, oh, I don't do that. I've never done that. I don't know how to do that. It's not safe, right? And sure, being on the floor, falling, that's not safe. But in what I tell people is that I feel like in rehab, particularly with the short amount of time that we're given, our job is to kind of teach you how to be safe. And then we sort of like bundle you up in like bubble wrap, and we send you home and say, be safe. But we never teach you how to get out of unsafe situations, because the truth is that everybody falls. It's going to happen. Happens to me, happens to you. And so how do you move yourself through space in a way that's most effective to keep yourself as safe as possible should you fall, and also be able to get out of an unsafe situation? So in the gym, it's fitness, and it's working on endurance and strength and power and cardiovascular and balance and coordination, but it's also in a way that all of the movements can be applied out there in the real world.
It's interesting because I've actually made a video on how to get up if you fall, because people keep asking it, and this is an area where that I don't see. In fact, as I get more and more, I've got over 100 different exercise videos. At some point, you can keep making exercise videos. There are, probably 200 or 300 more exercises I could make. But at some point, do you need more of those? Seems like I've been taking a direction more towards like, how do you put on your pants without holding on? Or how do you get in and out of a car? Or how do you get up off the ground if you fell? So I made a video where I crawl. I actually get onto one side because I completely act hemiplegic, don't do anything with my leg and arm. Except when I get over to the couch, I forget a couple times that my left arm isn't supposed to work, and I go to reach for the couch, and then I'll put it back behind my back. But so I maybe need to do how to get up using a burpee. I've done the crawling to the couch and pulling yourself up, crawling to the couch, and getting on your back and flipping on. You get your hips up and flip on like a dolphin, then sit up.
There's all kinds of versions.
I've done them with the tripod method, and I've got a video coming out. I took a private yoga lesson with a woman in San Antonio who's actually very interesting doctor of physical therapy and a yoga instructor. And she taught me how to get up using basically downward dog sun salutation, which I'd never done before, and so and now we're going to do it live on camera, right? Well,
Yeah.
I managed to do it. So I'm imagining like how to get up using the burpee method. Uh,
Yeah,
I think probably I get a lot of. I'm not sure I can do that yet.
well, so one of the things too that like folks don't know when they think about CrossFit is that part of their methodology is that it's infinitely scalable and modifiable. And what that means is that you and I, everyone in this group could be in the same CrossFit class, and we would all be doing a version of the same workout tailored to our individual needs, but we'd all be getting the same thing out of it. So I might be doing burpees, chest to deck, jumping at the top, and you might be doing them as lunges, like modified one knee down and back up again, but you're still getting the same stimulus, right? And I might be doing some sort of fancy version of like a handstand push-up. Like I might be upside down and you might be doing wall push-ups, but we're doing the same thing. We're getting, it's tailored to your individual need. And that's also what helps us, that scalability and modifiability is what helps us make it make sense for everyone. So your first session, no, you're not going to do a full burpee where you lay with your chest on the floor and push yourself up, but we can get there stepwise. And if that means it's one hand on a box and maybe one knee to the ground and then back up again, that's your starting point until we can move you further along.
I would assume, like me, try and teach people. I'm always trying to teach people. So I make videos, and people say, "Well, I can't do that yet." You make a video on exercises to do on the mat. Well, I can't get out of the wheelchair yet, and if I could, I can't get back. So people always take it back a notch or two, like with, and it's not like that they're. I mean, there are people who just say, "I can't, I can't, I can't." I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about people that haven't been taught how to do some of the basic things that they really probably ought to be taught in physical therapy. So I always teach people to try and be adaptive and try and break things down. Yesterday, okay, I've got somebody I work with, and she's her core and trunk and neck are so weak. If she does something like a pendulum, we were trying to give her some core exercises she could do in a wheelchair. Well, one of them is a pendulum, but when she leans one way or the other way, well, when she leans one way, she goes all the way. If the arm of her wheelchair wasn't there, she'd end up on the floor.
Right.
So how do you start that? Well, you don't start with your hands over your head. You can put them in neutral, you can put them in your lap, and you can just move. So I'm always trying to teach people, like I would assume you are, how to think about not being defeated, how to think about breaking it down. And I would assume if you're working one-on-one with them, that you also um, help them to do that. I think that being able to break down is an important step, because otherwise people end up like two things. Well, I can't do that, and they don't know how to break things down, or they see something that they don't have, some device or something. Well, I don't have one of those. Well, you know, there's so many things that you can do in life that are the same.
Yeah. And, I say that like, for those of you who've been through speech therapy, that a lot of regaining cognitive or linguistic skills is a lot of taking a big skill and breaking it down into its components and then building it back up again. And in the fitness world, it's the same thing. So if we take a burpee, we can break it down into all of its components and teach it stepwise and modify it along the way until you get back to that point where you can do it in full or to whatever version accommodates you and your need. But that was one of the overlaps for me with CrossFit and with speech and language, was that one of the things I really enjoy doing is taking that big skill and breaking it down into the manageable parts to help you then slowly gain the pieces back so that you get the independence again. Because I can just do the thing for you, but I want you to be able to find your way back to doing it yourself. So it's kind of like that zone of proximal development, like meeting you in the middle where it's just hard enough that you learn from it, but not so hard that you can't do it at all. And the same applies to fitness. Like I'm going to push you a little bit outside of your comfort zone, but also help folks to learn how to move better.
Right. And I think breaking down things is like one of the most important skills that you can have, because it helps keep you from getting defeated.
Definitely.
So many people, end up defeated because they feel like they run into a brick wall or an end, and it's not that it's actually an end. It's that they don't know how to break it down. They don't know how to
Yeah.
make it simpler. They don't know how to say, well, if using that fancy device for my wrist, that's the same as grabbing a hammer out of the junk drawer, which
Yeah.
is what I did to build up my wrist. I got a 8 ounce hammer and then a 16
There you
ounce hammer.
go. Perfect.
Well, therapy's all around you too. That's
It's
why
true.
I'm kicking myself for going to CrossFit, and I mean I saw it a little bit, but I didn't really see it because I mean I've got a trip to the kitchen where I chopped broccoli and washed dishes and wiped the counters down, wax on, wax off.
Yeah.
And all those things are what you're calling what we're calling or what is functional therapy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
And that's actually when people ask me, so like when I try to describe what it is that I love so much about being a speech therapist, it's just like it's everywhere, right? Language and cognition are everywhere in every single thing that we do. And so, I mean, the best and worst part of cognitive linguistic rehab, or when you have those needs, is that the opportunities are everywhere. You have a conversation, there's language. You read something, there's language. You listen to a commercial on TV, there's language, right? And so that was, I think, as a speech therapist, it was like there are all these ways to help people regain these skills in a functional capacity because you interact with language and cognitive skills everything that you do. And that's very similarly, that's what functional fitness is, because we all move, we all walk, we all go up and down stairs, we all got to sit on the toilet, we all got to get in and out of the car. Like all of these things are movements that occur in our everyday life. And so how do we maximize your functional capacity and your functional independence with those things?
right. Well, and I always say there's no therapy to prepare you for life than more than living life itself.
Exactly.
Um,
That's true.
Josh had a question about what is a burpee. Do you want to explain that to him, or you want me to do my kind of
I
half-ass?
thought that was something that you do with your mouth. You
No, no,
Oh,
no,
start.
no. It's
I
basically.
know, I'm joking.
Oh, you
It's
do?
like a squat
But
thrust.
Well,
I
let
am
Jenna say,
actually
because you
interested.
start standing up and you go down into like a push-up position and then
Squat.
come back up, but she'll do a better job than I can do.
yeah. A burpee is basically you get down to the ground with your chest on the ground and you're, basically laying down in a prone position. And then you push yourself back up and then you stand back up and then you jump at the top. So it's kind of like the full version of like if you fell flat on your face, getting yourself back up again.
Yeah, it starts with a push-up. The hard part is going from the push-up position to standing on your feet, because that
Yeah.
requires
Yeah.
some serious movement of your upper trunk to get your center of gravity over your hips, or you're going to go back on your nose again. Um,
Exactly.
let's talk a little bit. I mean, I know about a neurological approach and the importance of neuroplasticity, but we get a lot of people who are new to this. It's interesting because the audience is veterans. We've got several veterans here. Abraham, for example, is about what 24 years out, something like that.
27.
20. Okay. So,
No, 27 in
but
September.
then we also get people who had a stroke 2 weeks ago, and they're
Yeah.
trying to figure it all out. So let's talk for a minute about what is a neurological approach and why is that important?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, at the simplest level, neuroplasticity just means that the brain is always changing and always growing. So if you have stroke or a brain injury, there's damage in the brain, right? And neurons die and synapses can't communicate anymore because of either a blockage or dead cells between them. But the truth is that the brain is always regenerating, and the best way to sort of forge new neural pathways is to do stuff. So the more you do, the more those cells attempt to communicate. And even if they're not able to reach full communication at first, the more you do, the more the communication gap gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So the cells can communicate with each other, which is how we do stuff. Um, And neuroplastic, there's a lot of evidence now that like neuroplasticity is a very real thing and that the brain is always changing, which is how, if you think about in everyday life, we're all learning our whole lives. You learn a new word, you learn a new thing you've never seen before. And that's due in part to neuroplasticity, because the brain has to forge that pathway to learn that thing, whatever it may be. And there's actually a ton of evidence now that fitness and exercise actually promote neuroplasticity and new learning. There's a big body of evidence related to depression and things like that, and now a growing body of evidence related to cognition. And some of the basic studies show that with exercise increases growth. Excuse me, my dog's barking at the mailman. Exercise increases growth of a certain protein in the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is the part of the brain that is responsible for new learning. So by just getting your heart rate up and doing a little bit of fitness, you're actually priming your brain to learn and to have some of that neuroplastic effect.
Would that be BDNF?
It would be BDNF. Yep. You know
Okay,
yourself.
for those of you who don't know, that's brain-derived neurotropic factor.
Yep. Yep.
So I've seen it with different than an F on the end, a different word on the end, but basically, well, Dr. Hetzler is a neuroscientist who had a stroke, described it in his talk on neuroplasticity as miracle grow for the brain.
There you go. Yep.
And I'm real interested in BDNF because if you can work on maximizing BDNF, then it seems like you're going to work on speeding up those connections, narrowing that gap quicker. Just like I think if you can take a focused approach on BDNF, it'd be like taking a focused approach in terms of the exercises you're doing in your recovery. People, do crazy things like they get an under death spike and they do that for an hour for 3 years. And I'm thinking, I don't know what that's doing for you after 3 years, but I'm hesitant to tell them. But one couple of things that I've learned about BDNF, and you were kind of hinting on it. After Dr. Hetzler came on, we had a PT named Shannon who came on and said that it's actually, there have been studies, if you do some kind of aerobic warm-up before you do your therapy, that it increases BDNF. And then the latest that I've learned is that if you do intermittent fasting, also increases BDNF. I see you making a face, so you didn't.
I just haven't heard that.
Yeah, I know. So I mean, to say you hadn't heard that. Well, basically, it's like this: you're out on. We're only 10,000. We're 10,000 years removed from the savannah, walking around the savannah, drinking out of brooks, eating berries, and not always running into our next water source or our next food. So, if when you're intermittent fasting is basically a version of starving to death on the savannah, and our bodies go, uh-oh, we better get smarter and find some food, or we're going to be in big trouble. So they make BDNF. So I'm looking for an expert on BDNF because I think it would be fascinating to talk about all of the different things. There's also some belief that salmon and omega-3s and some of the foods that you eat can contribute. So I think it'd be real interesting to have a discussion on all the different things that you can do to increase BDNF. I found somebody on, I was watching the Netflix. If anybody hasn't watched the series, it's on Netflix. It was produced by PBS because they're all 53 minutes long. And it's called Human, the Body Within. And the one on the brain and the nervous system is called React. The one on the gut genome and eating is called Fuel. And so I found a BDNF expert. We'll see if she's willing to come on the show because she's kind of got her own national TV show.
She's got a few things going on.
Hey, I wrote to General Michael Hayden about coming on and talking about aphasia, and he said yes. So
hey, you never know. I think
you never know. Like my mom used to say, honey, if you don't ask, you've already got your answer.
That's true. It's very true.
So we'll see.
Yeah, it's great.
So obviously, I probably should have asked this before. Are there insurance situations that cover what you're doing, or is it completely outside?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's those, if anyone's ever tried, you probably know it's near impossible to even get extended speech therapy covered through insurance.
Oh
Speech
yeah,
therapy is the least well reimbursed. So, um,
it's hard enough to
unfortunately,
even get
Hmm.
somebody into speech therapy because
some people don't even have a cognitive benefit based, some insurances don't offer it. So unfortunately, we haven't been able to tap into any kind of insurance coverage for the gym, though some individuals, there is now, some insurances offer you a kickback if you have a gym membership. So some folks have found a way to at least get some reimbursement for belonging to a gym. And otherwise, I do have a scholarship program for my particular program, which is just, donor funded for folks who qualify. But yeah, that's always been a, how do we make this more accessible? But it's just a
right.
tough financial world out there.
Like I said, I should have asked before. I'm not certainly not trying to pick on you because
No, of
this is a big issue because
course.
I'm talking with somebody else that did something similar. They're stroke survivors and they're not physical therapists, and they went and set up like a physical therapy place.
Yeah.
And I don't know, but I'm going to guess that it's outside of insurance also. So, we've got a lot of seems like some of the best answers to the problems that we face are outside of insurance, and this creates a problem for people who are, for example, on disability, because you
Of
can't
course.
hardly stay alive on disability, let alone pay for anything,
Yeah.
or have
Yeah.
any luxuries at all. Luxuries. So you're lucky if you can pay for your
Yeah.
medication and
Yeah.
food.
But
Seriously.
and when I started this program, which I started at pre-COVID and then it, closed down and then went through some various iterations since then. My concern has always been that the people who need it the most won't be able to afford it. And that said, that really hasn't been my experience. And what that has afforded me the opportunity to do over time is offer the payment scale on a sliding scale sort of structure. And, those who can afford to pay for the service that it's worth do, and those who can't are covered by those who pay more. And that's been the best opportunity I've been able to provide to people. But it's been good because I've been able to get people in for a big range of price coverage, because folks who can afford it do, and they're happy to help. And I've had a lot of donations from, being part of a gym community means you get funding from your everyday athletes as well. So I'm always looking at ways to make it more accessible, but it's it's tough. It's a tough gig out there. And sometimes what I say to folks too is, you know, people sometimes end up in chronic rehab services, right? Where money is an issue, but you're maybe still paying a copay to go to a bunch of things once a week that you're maybe not progressing in anymore. And so at what point do you sort of cut a little bit of loss there on how much you're shelling out for this copay, that copay, that copay for something that may help move you forward? And that's all, it's always a little bit of a gamble, but it's a consideration.
Well, yeah, and this is an interesting situation because basically, as they shrink the amount of visits we get and the amount of therapy we get, it was a problem before, and the more they shrink it, the bigger a problem they make it. One of the things that one of my philosophies is if they aren't going to give us what we need, then we need to do it ourselves.
Yeah.
But you know more about this than I do because you've been doing it for a number of years, in the sense that you're operating outside the system. How do we get the system to recognize some of these alternative things? Because, I suspect what you're doing is working better than the traditional, physical therapy. Here, fill out this goals
Yeah.
form, and here are the sheets that you're going to need when I graduate you. At the same time. Um, So how do we get this is a really big question, and the needle has to move a little bit at a time. But I mean, obviously, it would make sense to for the insurance companies to focus on what works, and if but they're interested in minimizing their financial impact, which is why they're cutting things down. They're trying to get you out the door. So this is counterproductive to their bottom line. So I don't know how we would fix it as long as insurance companies are in charge of the system. And guess what? For those of you who are a little older than 30 years old, uh, we remember when the hospitals were uh, all private and not owned by big conglomerate corporations, and the insurance companies didn't drive the whole thing. They're they're a relative newcomer. When I was a kid, insurance people had insurance, but it wasn't the driving force
Yeah.
like it is now. I don't know how they got in that position. The crazy thing is, see, guess who's funding the insurance companies? Us. Guess who's at the bottom of the pile in terms of the trickle down that comes back to from the insurance companies? Us. The hospital systems and therapists and everything, all they have to be paid. But so we're funding the entire thing, and basically we're at the bottom of the heap, which makes no sense. Of course,
Yeah.
getting everybody in the country to boycott the insurance companies would be a big thing. Plus, boycotts typically don't work, but that's a
whole other thing. Yeah.
whole nother thing. Well, they don't work actually. Um, so, um, where do you see yourself going with this? That's maybe one you haven't been asked.
Yeah. No, people often ask me what my goal is, and honestly, it's to help as many people as possible. And I think the idea in a lot of ways is to help people see themselves in the gym, to help folks who wouldn't otherwise see it as a place for them, recognize that it is. And so, I get reached out to from individuals all over the world who are like, I don't know if this is for me, but maybe it is. And that's really the hope, is to help people find a space for themselves in a place that offers so much benefit. Um, and so, I always offer to help folks wherever they are in the world, to help other gyms and other gym owners feel comfortable helping populations that maybe they're not used to serving. So I'm hoping to just keep growing the idea of what we do here and help folks find their way to fitness, because it has such a long-term contribution to wellness and to our ability to be independent. And so, on a small scale, I'm doing a lot of one-on-ones and some group classes, and I'm hoping to continue to grow the groups and bring more people into the gym.
Right. So spread the concept is
Exactly.
well. The other thing is, no matter how long you have somebody or you're working with somebody, you can sometimes plant a seed in them. Some make them have some kind of realization or change that if they get involved in their own recovery, if they start to understand the principles of recovery and what you're teaching them about functional recovery, then when they can learn to do it on their own. That's a
Yeah.
lot of what I'm trying to do in terms of we were talking about breaking it down. Okay, I can break it down. I can break down anything. Like I was saying yesterday, I shot 6 videos on very simple core exercises that most people would go, well, those are easy. Why do they need to be broken down? We've never seen somebody like lean one way and fall because they have no trunk control at
Right.
all. So if you can well, it's the old you can give a man a fish or you can teach him to fish.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
one of the things I think that I see as a responsibility, I suppose. I mean, it's not a job. I'd volunteer to do this, but I still look at it as a job and a responsibility. I think it's our responsibility as teachers to try and teach somebody to fish, not just
Yeah.
give them a fish.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely. Yeah. And I think that's whole, the premise of what we do in the gym being that functional carryover is that, like, if I can help you build the skill set so that you can go out into the world and feel confident in getting up if you fall, or getting something off the ground if it falls, or sitting on a lower seat height, because sometimes you go travel and you're like, oh shoot, this seat is too small. If the skills in the gym can help you have that better carryover to live your life better, then we've done that, right? We didn't just give you the fish, we taught you how to fish.
Well, and teaching them, what can I do to make this work? This isn't working. Okay, think about this as a problem, and
Exactly.
how do I make this work, as opposed to, uh-oh, this doesn't work. I've hit another dead end.
Yeah, exactly.
So during COVID, did you do any kind of online type sessions?
I in the early stages I didn't, but that's solely because at the time I was working full time at Mass General. And the burden of
Oh yeah.
inpatient care at the peak of the pandemic was a little more than any empath can handle. So I kind of quieted it all down for a while until we knew what was going to happen with the state of the world. But I will say that, I don't think a lot of people, unless you've been touched directly by a relationship with rehab therapists and speech therapists in particular, most people don't know what speech therapists are or what we do. And so even a lot of folks in my more close circle, like, didn't really understand why I had to go to the hospital every day when people were at home. Like, what's a speech emergency? Like, why would you possibly be needed? And what I tell people that kind of kept me going forward and kept me wanting to get this program back up and running is that even when the world stopped because of a pandemic, tragedy didn't stop, and sickness and illness and strokes didn't stop. And so, a lot of folks who had their stroke during COVID were really isolated, even more so than those who've had it at other times. And so people would be alone in the hospital, navigating this whole world of stroke and stroke recovery and rehab without anybody by their bedside, without people visiting, without anyone to really help them understand that. And so I wasn't running this practice, but I was spending a lot more time with folks in their room to just be there for them and help them understand the process. And that sort of motivated me even further. And what I have found, if any of you have had your stroke during COVID, is that the access to services was that much more limited. So a lot of the folks that did come once I got things back up and running were folks who had their stroke. They maybe went to rehab really quickly and then they went home and they did nothing because the access to care was even more shuttered. So having these opportunities for people, in particular those who had very limited access, has kind of like driven me forward too.
Yeah, well, a lot of outpatient rehabs were shut down for a few
Yeah,
months in the
right.
beginning of COVID, and it's flat out shut down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And the first client that I took back on after the pandemic was actually a 3.5-year-old with CP, who was not yet placed in the public school system, and the only thing on offer was virtual PT. Now, this is a kid who's nonverbal and in a wheelchair, and like, you're going to put this 3.5-year-old in front of a screen and think that the PT services are going to get her the benefit that she needs and all that she's been missing. And so we brought her into the gym and we did a bunch of functional movement stuff. But I think virtual is great when it works, but it doesn't work for everyone.
well, it would seem like speech therapy would be something that seems like it would probably work okay in a virtual world.
Some, but not for everyone.
Not
But
for me.
maybe the easiest of them for sure without movement. But you know, if you're brand new to the rehab space, like for those who had already been having OT and PT and speech, and okay, now we're going to flip it to virtual, you at least have sort of like a schema, like how it works. And you're like, okay, well, now I'm on a call, but we have a relationship and we know therapy. If you're brand new to the therapy world, and then we're like, all right, here's a camera, let's try to do some functional tasks, that's hard for people to adjust to.
Hmm, interesting.
Right.
I wouldn't have thought that, but then I haven't tried it like you have,
Right.
so.
Like if you think about your most acute stroke recovery days where maybe you weren't moving very well, if someone just said, oh, here's a view on a camera, let me show you how to transfer, it's not the same as having a body, like somebody with you helping you stand and move. You know.
No, I can understand that because I end up coaching a lot of people, virtually, through Messenger, watching videos of them and that kind of thing. And it's just not the same as, people ask me questions sometimes where, the answer is really, well, it's hard to say because I can't get my hands on you. I can't,
Yeah. Yep.
it's different being there
Yep.
with somebody and being able to look down here and look there and do whatever you want versus watching a head to toe type
Yep.
video. And the other thing is, being able to, like, if you have somebody in a gait belt, you can feel when they're pulling on you.
Yeah. Right. Right. There's a little feedback there.
Right, there's a lot of feedback there. Okay, this person's pulling on me a lot. I better be careful. Or, wow, I'm not doing anything and they're not doing anything. This is just a safety thing. So well, I'm not telling you anything. I'm trying to tell it to the audience. There's definitely something to being there and being able to interact, touch, get a different view. You get a different view of somebody's feet when you're like next to them than when you're watching a video where the camera's 20 feet away. So virtual isn't going to be the answer for particularly things like CrossFit. I mean, because you can't grab that tire, you can't grab the barbells. People don't have this stuff at home either, so it's not like with speech. At least you could have like cards and symbols and things that you could go over that were a lot more accessible and affordable than back to the 800-pound tire. Whenever I think of CrossFit, I see that person like flipping over the tractor tire.
Yeah.
And when I went to shoot, I didn't realize that they weighed 800 pounds. I said, that looks pretty hefty. And they said, yeah, that tire weighs 800 pounds. I went, really? I would have guessed like maybe half that. But yeah, so when you see somebody flipping over a tire, that tire weighs a whole lot more than you would ever think
Yeah.
it would. So I was asking the virtual questions because, you're in Massachusetts and we got people out there that might go, boy, I'd like to I'd like to get in touch with Jenna, but I'm not in Massachusetts. So I was exploring, what kind of services you might offer to
Oh,
somebody who sees this and wants to reach out to you.
yeah, and I do offer remote programming and remote sessions and virtual sessions. I have clients all over the world and in Germany and Belgium and the UK and even some locally who just aren't comfortable getting out of their homes. And a lot of when the benefit of this being based on functional fitness is that you don't need much more than what's in your home, so I have a woman in London just outside of London, who I was working with this morning, who we were practicing squatting to different seats in her living room. So a chair, a couch with a stacked cushion, one without, and getting down to the floor and back up again and going up and down her staircase, right? So virtual is always an option. It doesn't have the same intensity, perhaps, depending on the individual's level of comfort, because for some folks, having someone right next to them helps them push a little harder. But it depends on the individual needs, but certainly virtual is an option.
Well, and it's one for somebody well, a lot of people live in rural settings, and if they don't have good local therapy, I mean, I was in a rural setting and I had to go to, well, I didn't have to, but there was a place in my town. And if I chose not to go there, it was a 15-minute drive and I couldn't drive. So now I have to have somebody like go with me for 3 or 4 hours, which is, asking a lot.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of people with limited options for which virtual might be. Also, sometimes people find somebody, better that like they might say, Jenna knows what she's doing. I want to talk to her. You know, because people have been plateaued by their therapists. And that's another friend of mine says, oh, your therapist plateaued you.
Yeah,
Meaning it's back to they didn't know what to do, they didn't mix it up. One of the things you can do, and you know this, Jenna, for people out there, it's one of the things that you need to do to not plateau is mix up your routine because the brain gets used to doing anything. So if you do the same thing forever, at some point the law of diminishing returns goes in, and if you keep doing it forever, you'll get almost to no benefit. So you hit on this earlier. The brain responds to challenges. So
that's
Yeah, you gotta keep updating it and challenging
yeah,
yourself and make it work for yourself. That's where I think neuroplasticity would come in. Like we were talking about falling, I think the neuroplasticity has everything to do with like being able to adapt to the situation and get yourself up.
yeah,
well,
definitely.
and adapting is,
Cause you can't cause you can't go to, this downward dog standing up way, or you can't always roll to your left and get on the side of your knees and get your hips over your knees that way. You can't always do this. So your neuroplasticity or ability to adapt, that comes into play
Yep.
big
well,
time.
go ahead, Jen.
I always say too, right? If it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you.
Yeah, and exactly that would come into play. Like I myself, I do calisthenics and work out like that, and I mean, my stepsister does CrossFit, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's great. It's just different. It's what's available, and it's just different forms of fitness. And I mean, fitness should be on everybody's plate. That's especially people that have had head injuries, because it leads to what adaptivity or neuroplasticity. It leads to that. So I
Well,
mean,
we were,
and
go ahead.
you're gonna have to take time off to heal up if you spend your whole life on the couch.
Well,
But if you spend your whole life being in shape, then
Mhm.
you're gonna be in shape when that time comes. You're not gonna have to lay in the hospital for 3 weeks and while your leg's getting removed.
well, and one thing about movement, I had a neurologist. We were talking about this after a motivational speech I gave one time, and he came up and was talking about it. And he said, "More movement equals less depression." We talked a little bit about this before, or glanced at it, and I thought about saying this. That's why I'm saying it now. So, because the more you move, the less likely you are to be depressed, because when you move, your brain makes some of those happy chemicals. And, people say, yeah, well, I tried going to the gym and I was really tired for 3 or 4 days. Well, what they did, I think Jenna will probably agree with this, is that they didn't go long enough to break through. It sometimes takes a week or two of going to the
Hmm.
gym before you actually gain energy from it. But once you have that breakthrough, going to the gym and exercising, moving actually ends up giving you energy. But some people go 3 or 4 days and end up, real tired and say, well, it didn't work. It didn't work for me. Well, and like a lot of things, people don't give it long enough. I'm a big believer that's why mirror box therapy doesn't work for most people, because it takes so long, and everybody wants instant results. So they aren't going to spend. Same with hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Well, that's expensive on top of taking a number of sessions. Both of them have been, proven to work in studies, but they take a lot of time, and people are unfortunately looking for that quick fix.
Yeah.
I think the most important thing that we can do is teach people to adapt, because if you learn to adapt, then you can stay on that path of constantly challenging your brain, and you can stay on the, well, I mean, that's the neuroplasticity path,
Yep.
and
Yep.
that's the path you want to stay on.
Yes,
So,
agreed.
Your body also hungry for the exercise you're doing.
Mm. Yeah, you really get used to it after a while.
oh yeah, your brain. I have a friend who says your brain's lazy. It's looking to take the simplest way out. So um, that's one of the reasons that, if you think about this, if you've had a stroke and you're hemiplegic, your brain does a bunch of things to keep you away from your affected side. Like you'll be standing around the kitchen. Next time you're standing around the kitchen, look down at your feet and you'll be standing on your unaffected foot. You'll have very little weight. I mean, I'm 14 years out and I still have to do this every day in everyday life. I was standing in the kitchen last night microwaving something and I looked down and I went, Ralph, you're standing with like 99% of your weight on your unaffected leg. Why are you doing that? You have to, so it's something you have to, I think, be thinking about cognitively in day-to-day life, and try and weight bear, try and have symmetry, try and adapt so you can stick to the neuroplasticity path. It's interesting that 40 years ago they didn't believe in neuroplasticity.
Yeah. Well, I worked with someone at Spalding for many, many years. The medical director used to say that the brain is the final frontier of medicine. And that's still true, right? There's still a lot that we don't know and still a lot that we're figuring out. But I mean, in a lot of ways, that's where the magic is, right? Because the brain continues to surprise us and continues to go above and beyond the expectations that anyone had for it, which is like where the neuroplasticity lies and where all the room for the improvement is.
I think it's going to always be that way because it's just such an amazing organ. You can learn everything that the liver does a lot quicker than I'm just picking the liver.
Yes.
Everything that the liver does a lot quicker than you can learn about everything that the brain does, because the brain's got 30 or 40 or 50 parts and they all have different functions. They all interact differently. They all interact, I mean, they don't interact differently. They all interact with each other. And we don't understand how some of that interaction goes on. You can say, well, this occurs in the cerebellum or the hippocampus, but we're not really sure exactly.
We're not totally sure. Yep.
How it communicates from the hippocampus or from the cerebellum affects your coordination and balance. So somehow or another, it's talking to both sides and putting that information together. And we may understand that. So I'm not sure I'm picking a good example, but there are lots of things in the brain where parts of the brain are talking to other parts of the brain, and we don't understand how that's working. And I think that the brain will always be the part of the body that is the final frontier, just due to its complexity.
Yeah.
I transitioning from PT to Feldenkrais is one of the more challenging things I've been going through, in sometimes they give the exact opposite directions of what to do. Like for instance, I was affected on my left side, and when I would step with all my weight on the right foot, I could really move my left foot with a lot of freedom. So it was almost a full stride. But when my weight shifted to my affected foot, I could only, because the body didn't trust the left foot, I could only move about a third or a half the distance with the right foot. Physical therapy wanted me to take longer strides. And when I tried to show my son what I was being trained to do, I fell down and injured my back. And whereas the Feldenkrais, they encouraged me to cut down on the length of the left foot stride so they were even and have it be a match for the right foot. So it's the Feldenkrais, and I don't mean to be an advocate or an advertisement for it, but I've learned that the conversation was around back in the 1940s about neuroplasticity. So, and it's amazing how much emotion affects our ability to move, like fear after you've fallen. Boy, my strides got very short, and there are many other examples. but it's really amazing what the emotional contact effect is.
Well, that's interesting because I'm not a physical therapist. I'm an observer, and I've walked a lot of people with a gait belt. And one thing I notice is that they'll, because of weight bearing, they'll take a bigger step with their affected foot, like you're talking about, and then they basically will play catch up with the other foot. They won't move that foot as far forward. Now, and I know they teach you to try and take a bigger step, but that doesn't necessarily work unless you can do the weight bearing. And even if you can do the weight bearing, I found as a stroke survivor, and this is something that therapists don't necessarily know, even though I can do the weight bearing, I still got a stroke brain that's saying, don't put any weight over there. Don't do that. Don't lean that way. Don't do that. Because it protects you in the early days and you end up with leftover fears. So it's interesting to hear you say that because what I've always done, and like I said, I'm a practical physical therapist in that I have no training. I have to watch and see what makes sense to me. So what I've done is basically what you're saying. I've said to try and get to even steps. And the one way to do that is take less of a step with your affected foot. Now you do need to take a little bit more, and then also with your unaffected foot to try and even them out. But rather than trying to get people to take, two big or multiple big steps one after each other, I just try and get them to even them out. I'm a big believer in symmetry. I'm sure Jenna's got a bunch to say about symmetry, but whatever you want your affected side to do, just look over at your unaffected side. I like the language healing side and teaching side, because your teaching side knows what your body should be doing. And I literally practiced, things like moving my hands the same, looking in mirrors. I practice what they call in yoga mountain pose, which is also neutral, basically starting with your feet, getting your feet the same width as your knees, hips, and shoulders. Sucking in your core, doing your shoulders right, holding your head straight. Yep, I have to do that. If I go down here and I go back to what I think is neutral, I have to, this way I have to push, the other way I have to push. I get so screwed up with Zoom because everything's backwards. It's like looking in a mirror. But it's important to know where that neutral point is. It's important to try and get both sides of your body to work the same. I bet CrossFit's pretty good for that.
Yeah. I mean that, it's it's all about full body, it's all about functional movement. And in the gym, we don't use a lot of machines, and that's to help you use your own body better.
Right. Well, I'm not a big believer in machines. Your body's, there are a lot of exercises you can do where you basically use your own body weight.
Exactly.
And I'm also, I don't know how you feel about this, but I'm not that big on weights. I'm big on repetitions. If you're going to use weights, I say use a light weight so you can do it nice and clean and smooth, because jerky crap and stuff you can't do right and forcing and stuff is, to me, not good movement. But you're the expert. Like I said, I do things based on what seems to make sense and what's practical.
Yeah, and that's kind of the premise of functional fitness, right? It's like how ways to move your body through space in ways that are logical and practical and make sense with how you move out there in the world. And so the more that we can teach you how to move your body the best way that you can, the better carryover. And there aren't leg press machines out there in the world, but there are seats. So if we want to work on leg strength, we're going to practice sitting and standing instead of putting you in a machine, because that has better carryover.
All right, well, we've taken up a bunch of your time. What else would you like people to know about you and what you're doing?
Yeah, I feel like we covered quite a bit of it. I mean, I think, the The thing that's most important to me is that people see the gym as a place where they can belong. You know, I use a ton of athlete examples and videos all over my Instagram page because I find that that is the way to really let people see it for themselves and see, despite any level of limitation, that there's room for everyone there and there's ways to modify and make it all accessible to individuals. You know, and I think just the takeaway that, like, you know, fitness goes beyond wellness, right? The opposite of sickness is actually being fit. It's not just being well, it's pushing the needle beyond that to a place where you're healthy and your body moves well and you've taken good enough care of yourself that you're ready to combat any illness or anything on the other side. You know,
Better
so
than good enough.
what's that? It's better than good enough. Exactly.
Better than good enough. Yeah.
Better than good enough. Yeah. And that all survivors deserve that, right? That I know the survivors of all kinds of brain injuries and strokes are like looking for more, and they're deserving of more and are willing to put in the work. And so the more we can provide those opportunities for folks to find that better than good enough, the greater we can do.
Well, there are a lot of people out there that take responsibility for their recovery, and they typically start a home program while they're in physical therapy, which is a good idea. And they do, and they understand that you don't get better going to PT 1 hour a week, and that kind of thing. And I'm a visual learner, so I really like being able to see and do videos. I also was a video professional for 30 something years before my stroke. So that's another reason that I'm a big believer in videos. And you mentioned your Instagram page, and that's where a lot of people follow you. And I just want to let everybody know that if they look down in the description underneath this video on YouTube, that you'll find all of Jenna's contact information and Instagram and things like that if you want to follow her or contact her about getting some help for your particular situation. So I guess I want to thank you, Jenna, for taking the time.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, well, you know.
I have one more question.
Sure.
Oh, sure.
Jenna, what happens to an individual that has nobody living with him or her, and whoever it is, the relatives or everything, is like against the person? Like, you know, they feel sorry for the individual that had a stroke, but not yet right there yet. So what are you supposed to do with that?
I'm not sure I understand the question. You mean when folks don't want the survivor to be independent?
Yes.
What's my advice for that? Ooh.
Get a new family?
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know,
it's kind of like Stockholm.
I mean, I think, right, like life doesn't happen in a bubble. And so in order for a survivor to continue to live their life, their family has to let them get outside of that protected bubble, because you can't be protected forever. I mean, I think that's the best advice I try to offer. And, you know, I always tell folks that your family saw you at your worst, right? From the outsider, you experienced it, but they saw it. And in their scope, it was the worst thing that ever happened, and they almost lost you. And so a lot of family members are afraid to lose you again, right? And that's like where we get this overbearing nature. But I think what I tell survivors to tell their family is that, like, hey, I survived a stroke, so like, I'm good. Like I did all of this. I can do more. Believe in my ability to recover, because look at me now. I know that's easier said than done, but I think, like, if you survived a stroke, man, and you recovered, you can do anything. And so your family needs to hear that and know that.
Did you? Have you survived? Oh,
No.
I wasn't sure if you had or not.
No, I'm just passionate about the population.
Well, and also,
Good on you.
I brought on 2 OTs, a PT, a neuroscientist. I brought on 5 or 6 people that are therapists or doctors that also suffered a stroke. I find it very interesting, the kind of the both sides of the coin thing. And
Yeah.
Lenny, back to your question, one of the things that a lot of survivors have to do is make it clear to their family that not to help them unless they want help. Um, I had to go through that because people kept doing things for me, and I'd say no, I want to do them. That's how I'm going to get better. And I had somebody I was in the rehab hospital and therefore the in-house stroke group with. I saw them some months later, and I'd gotten a lot better than the woman who had the stroke at the same time as me. Of course, you never know whether it's the severity of the stroke, the attitude, whatever. But her husband was doing everything for her, and I watched him. And so he came over to me, wanted that like little nugget, that magic bullet or pill or little nugget of information that he could take and make his wife better. And so I said, well, I have something to say, but I'm really hesitant to say it to you because I don't want you to get mad at me. I'm going to see you at more of these meetings. And he said, oh, I can deal with it. I said, okay, you sure? And he said, yeah. So I told him, you need to stop coddling her. You help her up the steps, you hold her hand everywhere. How's she going to learn how to be better on her own if you're constantly there for her? So that's an issue sometimes with families. Maybe it's the opposite side. Families are really weird. I mean, I've heard all kinds of stories like, um, I wish I could have a stroke. Somebody's sister once said to them, I wish I could have a stroke so I could show you how it was done when they weren't getting better fast enough. People with hidden deficits have real problem with this. There are a number of people who end up with brain fog and short-term memory, mild cognitive issues that don't have much hemiplegia or physical side, and I think they have a real hard time because you can't see. At least if you're hemiplegic and you're in the supermarket, you got like a postured arm and you're limping, or you're in, it's fairly obvious something's not right with you. And if you've got brain fog and short-term memory issues, it's not obvious. You don't see it from the outside.
Yeah. And I think the other thing I tell survivors is that it's important to remind your family that you survived so that you could live your life. You didn't survive to be sequestered away or kept safe or living in your home and never getting out to experience life. You survived this injury and event so that you could continue to live. And sometimes that means moving on and having greater independence and trying new things and all of that. And that can be hard for family because they want to keep you safe, but it's important to put your foot down.
They also don't know what to do. I mean, they're not therapists, they're not psychologists, they're family. They love you. And you have to remember that when any kind of weirdness is going on with your family, that it's probably based in love, not on aggravating you.
Comes from a good place.
Yeah, it comes from a good place. So you have to kind of remember that because, I mean, that's their motivation. They want to do something, they don't know what to do. So they'll do whatever they think they can do to help. So, all right. Well, with that, I guess we'll thank you again, Jenna, and I'll put all of Jenna's contact information in the description below this video. So if you would like to get in touch with her, you can do that. And so thanks to you again, Jenna.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
All right.
Bye now.
Bye.
Thank you.
See you later. Thank you.